We were just curious. That's how it always starts, doesn't it? 3 friends, a camera, and a forest filled with legends. We didn't come to Bridgewater Triangle to chase ghosts or summon spirits. We came to document the forgotten corners of New England, where stories linger in the trees like fog. We thought we were prepared. Gear packed, maps printed, backup batteries, even local folklore burned into our brains like bedtime stories. Ethan had his cameras, Harper had her notes, Micah had his doubts. On the first day, the fog felt welcoming, soft, almost beautiful. But there's a silence here that doesn't belong to nature. The birds stop too suddenly. The wind moves without touching the trees. You don't notice it until it's too late, that you're being watched. Not followed, watched. We didn't go looking for horror. We were chasing forgotten history. Stories etched into stone, whispered by moss-covered gravestones, or buried beneath crumbling foundations. But something found us anyway. Something that didn't want to be seen. Or maybe, something that desperately did. What we experienced over the next 6 nights wasn't a string of coincidences or campfire tales. It was personal, intelligent, layered in a way none of us could explain. Each night peeled something back, from us, from the forest. And when the fog turned red, we knew we'd gone too far. I don't know why they let us leave. I don't know what we carried back. But ever since we left, none of us have slept through the night. We've all heard the whispers, and sometimes in the mirror, we're not alone. So before you listen to what happened, ask yourself, if curiosity is what got us in, what's gonna get you out? This is our story, and it's not finished yet. The fog knows your name. The fog was thicker than I remembered. Not that I had any memory of this place. I'd never been to Hockomock Swamp before, but I'd seen fog before. This wasn't that. This felt like standing inside someone's breath, warm and cold at the same time, clinging to the back of my neck like fingers I couldn't swat away. I kept checking over my shoulder, even when Juno didn't growl. She was calm, sitting beside me at the edge of the trail, ears up, nose twitching, but tail still. She was watching something. Or wait. We'd arrived earlier that day, Harper buzzing with excitement, Micah unusually quiet. The plan was simple: set up camp before dark, scout the area, and then record some footage for her video series. But I couldn't shake the tension in my gut. Maybe it was the drive. Maybe it was the stories. Maybe it was the way the trees leaned just slightly inward, as if the swamp was folding in on itself, pulling us closer. We pitched our tents just off a service trail, near a dried stream bed Micah said hadn't had water in years. He chose the spot carefully, claimed it was neutral ground, whatever that meant. I didn't ask. I trusted his instincts more than I trusted my own. Still, something about the air made my skin itch. I kept thinking I heard my name whispered, but it was always the wind, always the leaves, until it wasn't. That first night, I didn't sleep much. Harper snored lightly 2 tents away, and Micah had zipped himself into his cocoon of a sleeping bag like he was bracing for something colder than weather. I lay in my tent, staring up at the flimsy nylon roof, listening. Not for animals, not for wind, for something else. Juno whined once, low and confused. The way she did when someone knocked at the door but didn't come in. I reached over and scratched behind her ear to reassure her. She didn't respond. Her head was up, alert, her body rigid. I heard it then. Not footsteps, too soft, more like a drag, something being pulled across the earth. A rhythm, not quite human, not quite animal. And then breathing, close, not mine, not Juno's. A third cadence, slow and shallow, like someone lying right outside the tent, their mouth pressed close to the fabric. I didn't move, neither did Juno. The breath stopped. The night held its silence like a breath of its own. Then a voice, not loud, just enough to be real, just enough to freeze my spine. "Ethan." I didn't answer. Couldn't. The breath resumed, a sigh this time, and then footsteps, real ones, retreating slowly, crunching the dry brush and brittle twigs outside. Juno let out one low growl, and then the air returned, like someone had opened a sealed room. I finally exhaled. My lungs hurt from holding it in. I stayed awake until the sky turned gray. The morning came, but it brought no warmth. The fog hadn't lifted, it just turned pale, washed out, like a sheet pulled over a body. Harper stumbled out of her tent first, yawning, rubbing her eyes. She didn't mention anything strange. Micah emerged next, already dressed, already watching the tree line like it might do something. Juno stayed close to me, unusually quiet, her head low, tail tucked just enough to notice. We didn't talk about the night. I wanted to, but something in me said not to. Like putting it into words would make it stronger, more real. Like naming a storm might give it permission to stay. We ate in silence, passing around lukewarm coffee and dry granola bars. Harper flipped through her notebook, then looked up. "I think we should check out the old logging road Micah mentioned." He nodded without enthusiasm. "It's not far, maybe a 20-minute hike." The road was overgrown, choked by vines and roots, barely distinguishable from the forest floor. As we walked, I kept glancing back. I didn't hear anything, didn't see anything, but the feeling never left. The sense that if I turned around fast enough, I might catch something watching us. Halfway down the trail, Juno froze. Not a bark, not a whine, just stillness. She stared into the brush, unmoving. I followed her gaze but saw nothing. Harper did the same, then shrugged and moved on, but Juno didn't follow. She looked at me, waiting. That's when I saw it, not clearly, just a shape, between two trees, hunched, motionless, a little too tall, a little too narrow, gone when I blinked. I didn't say anything, I just whispered, "Come on, girl," and Juno trotted after me, but her ears never lowered. By the time we reached the clearing Micah mentioned, the light had dimmed. Not from sunset, it was still mid-afternoon, but from clouds thickening overhead and fog weaving again between the trees. It had a way of returning without warning, as if the forest exhaled it in slow, deliberate breaths. The clearing wasn't much, just a shallow dip in the land with remnants of rusted metal and splintered wood, old machinery bones, vines strangling the life from what remained of a logging station, long abandoned. Harper began filming immediately, narrating into her mic like we were on a ghost hunting reality show. But even she, ever the skeptic in tone, couldn't hide the tremble in her voice when her light flickered. Micah crouched near a pile of scrap. "And these weren't here the last time I came." I raised an eyebrow. "When was that?" He didn't answer, just stared at a rusted chain looped through a stump like a collar. Juno paced. She didn't sniff or stop. She just paced, restless, circling us like a silent warning bell. Then came the noise. It wasn't loud, just wrong. A hum that started low and metallic, rising slightly, vibrating not in the air but in our bones. My teeth buzzed. Harper clutched her recorder. Micah stood. "Time to go," he said, voice low, steady. The hum ceased, but it didn't fade. It stopped all at once, cut off like scissors on a wire. And in the silence that followed, we all looked at each other, finally acknowledging what we hadn't dared to say since the night before. Something was here. And whatever it wasn't finished with us yet. We didn't run, not exactly, but our walk back to camp was faster, tighter, less filled with idle talk. Even Harper didn't record much on the way. Juno stayed pressed to my leg, her panting shallow, as if she were trying to make herself invisible. The fog had thickened again, not in waves this time, but in strands. Ropes of mist that curled low around our knees like they had purpose, like they wanted to know what we were made of. Micah stopped once, at a fork in the trail that hadn't been there yesterday. "That wasn't there before," he murmured, almost to himself. I didn't ask what he meant. None of us did. We just took the path we knew, or thought we knew. When we reached camp, the air felt heavier, like the atmosphere had gained weight. My tent looked normal, untouched. But when I opened the flap, Juno refused to go inside. She growled, soft, low, constant. I ducked in, half expecting to find someone waiting, but the tent was empty. Cold. Wrong. On my sleeping bag sat a pine cone, perfectly centered, clean, too clean. I didn't say anything. I just removed it, placed it on the ground, and zipped the tent shut again. That night, the silence didn't creep. It pounced. No wind, no insects. Even the usual creaks of the trees felt forced, like someone trying to pretend the forest was normal. Harper lay awake. I could hear her turning. Micah stood outside for hours, unmoving, just watching the dark. I didn't sleep, not after what I saw inside my camera. One of the photos I'd taken that afternoon, of the clearing, now showed a figure, not blurry, not distant. A figure, tall, narrow, standing where Juno had been looking back. I didn't show the photo to Harper or Micah, not yet. Maybe I was afraid it would change if I spoke it out loud, or maybe I was scared they'd seen something too, and just like me, decided not to say a word. The next morning felt brittle, like the whole forest might crack if we stepped too hard. Fog still hung low, thick as milk, clinging to our tents like webs. Juno had stayed outside all night, resting but never fully asleep. Her eyes never closed, not once. We packed up slower that day, our movements quieter. The mood had shifted, less like explorers, more like survivors pretending not to notice the cracks forming in our confidence. Harper offered to lead. She wanted to check out a ridge she'd marked earlier from a topographic map, convinced there were ruins up there. Foundation stones from some colonial-era structure. Could be tied to those logging artifacts, she said. Might even predate them. Micah didn't speak much. He just nodded and kept glancing over his shoulder. Halfway up the ridge, I noticed something off. There were markings on the trees. Not carvings, just discoloration, like a hand had pressed against the bark and left behind something wrong. It wasn't sap. It wasn't dirt. It felt warm. "Ethan," Harper called from ahead. "You should see this." She'd found the stones. They were barely visible beneath years of moss and roots, but the outline was clear. A perfect circle, just large enough for maybe 4 or 5 people to stand inside. In the center, a single wooden pole. New, untouched by time. Driven into the earth so deep I couldn't see its base. Micah didn't step inside the circle. Neither did I. Harper did. And that was the last time the fog looked white. The change was immediate. The moment Harper stepped into the circle, the air shifted, denser, heavier, like pressure before a storm. The fog, once a pale curtain, darkened to the color of bruised skin. And there was a sound now, a low guttural pulse, like the earth itself had a heartbeat and it was getting faster. Harper stood completely still, her arms at her sides, her face tilted slightly upward, lips parted but silent. I called her name once, then again, no response. Micah grabbed my shoulder before I could step forward. "Don't," he said. His voice wasn't urgent, but absolute. "If you go in after her, it might take both of you." I didn't ask what it was. Juno barked, loud, sharp. It broke whatever trance held the moment together. Harper blinked, turned around slowly, and stepped out of the circle like nothing had happened. "Sorry," she said, frowning. I don't know why I stopped." We left the ridge immediately. Back at camp, the fog remained dark, even as the sun lowered and should have painted everything gold. I checked my camera again. The photo from the clearing, the one with the figure, was gone. Deleted. In its place was a new image. I hadn't taken it. No one had. It was a photo of our camp from above, like a drone shot, but we didn't have a drone. In the photo, we're all visible. Harper, Micah, myself. And behind us, barely noticeable in the tree line, was a fourth figure. Tall, narrow, still. We didn't sleep that night. No one did. Even Juno growled in her dreams. That was night 2. We still had 4 more to go. As we lay in our tents that night, none of us spoke. The fire had died early, and even Harper didn't bother with her notebook. Micah sat with his back to a tree, holding something in his hand. A charm, maybe, or a carved token. I never asked. Juno didn't lie down. She sat between us, facing the woods, ears twitching, eyes unblinking. It was like she knew, like she was waiting. Waiting for what? We didn't know. But something out there was waiting too. The lantern line. I've never been afraid of the dark. That's what I kept telling myself. Even as the sun dipped below the horizon and the fog started to crawl up the trail again. The second night in Bridgewater Triangle was supposed to be uneventful. A buffer between Ethan's tense encounter and whatever came next. But this place doesn't believe in breathers. It just presses deeper, like a hand on your back pushing you forward whether you want to move or not. We'd chosen a new site near the edge of Freetown Fall River State Forest. Micah said it was safer, though he never elaborated. Ethan still hadn't shown us the photo. I knew he was hiding something, but I didn't push. We were all fraying a little, threads pulled tight. That evening, I volunteered to take a solo loop around our site, mostly to clear my head. I told them I wanted to scout for a good sunrise shot the next morning. Ethan nodded without looking up from his camera. Micah just handed me a walkie-talkie and said, "Stay on the path." The path was fine, at first. Pine needles underfoot, distant rustle of animals. Even the fog felt lighter, peaceful. But about 15 minutes in, I noticed something strange. A flicker of light ahead, low to the ground. Not white, not yellow. Red. I stopped. The light blinked once, then again. I thought it might be a camper or another hiker, but there was no movement, no voices, just one steady pulse. Then 2, then 3 in a line. They weren't blinking, they were breathing, and they were getting closer. I raised the walkie-talkie, thumb hovering over the call button. I don't know why I didn't press it. Maybe I didn't want to sound ridiculous. Maybe I didn't want the sound of my voice to break the spell of the moment. Or maybe some small part of me wanted to know what they were. The red lights floated about 2 feet off the ground. They didn't sway like lanterns or bob like flashlights. They moved with intention, steady, slow, deliberate. I counted 4 now, then 5, all equidistant, like a procession. Then they stopped. I crouched behind a fallen log, holding my breath. The air had thickened again, and for the first time since I'd left camp, I noticed how quiet it was. No insects, no birds, no wind, just the slow, steady pulse of red light. One blinked out, then another, then all of them. I waited. Seconds stretched like taffy. I wanted to believe they were gone, that I could laugh this off when I got back. But the forest had other plans. Something moved behind me, not fast, not loud, just there. I turned slowly, heart climbing into my throat. There was no one, nothing. But the trail behind me looked different. The trees were too close together. The curve of the hill was wrong. I retraced my steps, confident in my direction, but the path kept veering left when I was sure it should have turned right. I wasn't lost. I was somewhere that looked like where I had been, but it wasn't the same. And that's when the lights came back. Behind me this time, closer. I ran. Not a sprint, Not a panicked stumble, just a focused, determined jog meant to retrace my steps with as little noise as possible. My breathing grew loud in my ears, almost drowning out the pounding of my boots against the soft ground. But nothing followed, at least not that I could hear. I slowed when the trail ahead began to look familiar again, if familiar meant less warped. A split in the path I recognized. A birch tree with two trunks leaning like it had once tried to fall but changed its mind. Relief settled into my bones like warmth. Then the walkie crackled. Harper. Micah's voice low and urgent. I stopped moving, raised the device. I'm here. Static. Then, are you alone? I froze. I pressed the button. Yes, why? A longer pause. Then, we saw something. Near camp. Lights. 5 of them. In a line. My mouth went dry. I saw them too. I think they tried to lead me off trail. You're still off trail, he said. You've been gone almost an hour. No, that wasn't right. I checked my watch. 27 minutes maybe. Not even half an hour. I'm heading back, I said, trying to keep my voice level. Then Ethan cut in. There's someone behind you. The walkie fell silent. I didn't move. The trail ahead was still clear, nothing in sight, but the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and the air grew colder by degrees. And from somewhere just past the edge of my hearing, a voice whispered, "Keep walking." I did as the voice said, not because I trusted it, but because my body moved before my mind caught up. A few steps at first, then a steady march, eyes locked on the narrowing trail ahead. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The moment felt hinged on a single rule. Don't break the momentum. Don't acknowledge what you can't explain. The trees began to thin. I saw the outline of our campfire, burning low now, a red eye in the mist. Juno barked once when I stepped into view, and Ethan stood immediately. Micah was already watching the path, his jaw clenched, walkie still in hand. You okay? He asked. Define okay, I said, trying to smile. Didn't hold. I sat beside the fire, my legs suddenly too heavy. Ethan handed me a thermos of something warm. I didn't ask what. I drank. I lost time, I said after a while. You were right. It was almost an hour. Micah nodded. The trail shifts sometimes. That's not normal, I snapped, more sharply than I meant to. Trails don't just move. He didn't respond, just stared at the fog beyond the tents. Later that night, I checked the footage on my recorder. Most of it was static. Interference like a magnet had brushed across the lens. But one frame was clear. Just one. 5 lights, in a line, and below them, a shape, barely outlined. Humanoid, head tilted, watching me. I deleted the clip, not out of fear, because I couldn't stop myself from thinking it wanted me to show it to someone. The fog didn't lift that night. It just changed color. Pale gray to charcoal, then something closer to red near the forest's edge, like embers pulsing through smoke. We stayed close to the fire, no one saying much. Ethan polished his lenses obsessively. Micah never let the walkie out of his hand. I kept glancing into the trees. I knew they were still there, the lights. Even without seeing them, I could feel their rhythm in the back of my eyes. Like when you stare at the sun too long and the shape lingers, burned into your vision. Just before midnight, Juno stood up, growled once, and turned away from the fire. We all followed her gaze, but the forest was empty. No lights, no sound. And yet, I felt it again. That breath on my neck. That sense of being watched not by eyes, but by intention. Like something was waiting for me to acknowledge it, to invite it in. I didn't sleep. None of us did. Even Ethan eventually put his camera down and stared at the coals like they held answers. In the morning, the fog was gone. No trace. The trees looked normal again. The trail, solid and familiar. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd brought something back. Not physically, just aware of me now. Aware that I had seen it, heard it. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still see those lights. Not blinking, not moving, waiting. If I had followed them, really followed them, would I have found something? Or would I have disappeared into something that wears the forest like a mask? That question still keeps me up, and I'm not sure I want the answer. Whispers that knew my name. I don't know when it started, this feeling of being unmoored, like something in my mind had begun to shift without permission. It wasn't the fog, it wasn't the lights, the strange ones I'd seen moving in the trees either. It was something else. Something that grew quiet in the back of my head and tugged at my thoughts when I wasn't paying attention. A name. That night, after the fog had cleared and everything seemed to return to its usual stillness, I couldn't shake the sensation that something was waiting for me. Not at the edge of the campfire light, not in the trees or the mist, but somewhere inside me. I stayed awake most of the night. Ethan had fallen asleep in his chair, the camera resting on his lap, still recording, still blinking like a sentinel. Micah sat across from me, silently, his eyes never quite meeting mine. There was a quiet tension between us, a knowledge, unsaid, that we were past the point of ignoring whatever was happening. The next morning, I decided to take a walk alone. I needed space. Maybe I needed to clear my head. Maybe I was looking for an answer that didn't exist. I headed towards the deeper woods, away from the camp. The trees seemed to close in more here, as if the forest was shifting its weight to make room for something. The light filtering through the canopy was dim, and the silence around me was thick, almost oppressive. That's when I heard it. Not at first, but after I'd walked for a while, lost in my thoughts, I thought I heard a whisper. Soft, faint. At first, I thought it was just the wind, rustling through the leaves, but then it came again, clearer this time. Harper. I stopped dead in my tracks. I wasn't alone anymore. It wasn't just that it said my name, it was how it said it, like a memory. Not loud, not menacing, but intimate. Like someone who knew me well, calling from across a dream. I turned slowly, scanning the trees behind me. Nothing. No movement, no shadow slipping between trunks. Just that sound echoing in my mind like a half-forgotten melody. I stood there for a long moment, listening. Silence. Then again. Harper. Closer this time. I felt my legs lock. Something inside me, logic, fear, instinct, screamed to run. But another part, something deeper and older, told me to listen, to follow. That's when I saw it. A shape, just barely. Between two trees, not quite formed. A figure that shimmered like heat above asphalt, human in outline but flickering around the edges. It didn't move. It didn't speak. But the air around me felt charged, like before lightning or during a held breath. And then, more whispers. Not from it, but from the woods themselves, like dozens of voices speaking just under the threshold of clarity. Some were angry, some pleading, all of them tangled together in a language that might have once been English, but no longer made sense. I took a step forward. The shape vanished, but the whispering didn't stop. If anything, it grew louder, and then I realized my name wasn't the only one being said. Micah. Ethan. Come back. You don't belong here. The trees were speaking. No. Something in the trees was speaking through them. I backed away, slow and steady, trying not to make a sound. Every step felt like it echoed 1,000 miles. The voices didn't follow, but they didn't stop either. They drifted, as if the forest had opened a mouth and was muttering secrets it hadn't meant to say aloud. That's when I tripped. A root, maybe a branch. I hit the ground hard, palms scraping against damp leaves and soil. The wind knocked from me. I lay still, listening. Silence. Then a single word, louder than the rest. Micah? My heart slammed against my ribs. That wasn't just a whisper. That was a call. I scrambled to my feet and started running. Not toward camp, at least not consciously. I just moved, trusting that my body still remembered which direction safety lived in. I burst through a clearing, lungs burning, and nearly collided with Micah. He caught me before I hit the ground again. What happened? I heard. I tried to catch my breath. Something calling my name. Your name. Ethan's too. There was a shape in the woods. It knew us. Micah's eyes darkened. He didn't look surprised. I've heard it before, he said. What? Not here, years ago. Back in Rehoboth, in the pines behind my grandfather's house. I thought I imagined it, but I was a kid. You question the forest when you grow up inside it. You listen, or you disappear. I stared at him, heart still racing. What do you mean, disappear? He didn't answer. Instead, he turned toward the trees and said, It knows we're listening now. Back at camp, Ethan was reviewing footage again, headphones pressed tight against his ears, eyes narrowed at the tiny screen on his camera. He didn't look up when we returned, not even when Micah muttered, We need to talk. I sat by the fire, my knees still trembling, my hands refusing to stay still. I didn't know what scared me more, the voices themselves, or how calm Micah had been when he admitted he'd heard them before. I think it's connected, I said, staring into the embers, to the fog, the lights, the way the woods shift. Micah nodded. It doesn't just want to scare us, it's trying to pull something from us, like it's learning, or remembering. Remembering what? Ethan asked suddenly. He'd pulled the headphones down around his neck, and his voice startled me more than it should have. He turned his camera around and showed us a freeze frame. It was me, walking through the woods that morning, but the angle was wrong. It wasn't from my camera, it wasn't from Ethan's. It was from above, like someone had been watching us from the canopy. And in the corner of the frame, barely visible, was a shape. The same shimmer I'd seen earlier, just behind me, almost brushing my shoulder. That's not possible, I whispered. I didn't take this, Ethan said. I found it on the SD card. It wasn't there last night. We sat in silence for a long time. Then Micah said, If it's watching us, we need to know what it wants. To which Ethan replied, eyes still locked on the shape in the screen, or who it used to be. That night, we didn't sleep. None of us admitted it aloud, but something had changed. The air felt thinner, the trees somehow closer. Even the fire didn't seem to burn the same, its crackle too soft, its heat unable to reach past our skin. I lay in my tent listening to every sound, every shift of wind or snap a twig. I kept waiting for the whispers to return. They didn't. Not in the forest, at least. But they came anyway. They came in dreams. In mine. I was walking through the woods alone again. Same trail, same dim light through the trees. But I wasn't afraid. I was being led. The voices weren't frightening. They were familiar, comforting. I followed them deeper and deeper, past places I didn't recognize, until I reached a clearing I'd never seen before. There, in the center, was a massive tree, hollowed, ancient, and from inside it, a voice whispered, "You know me." I woke up gasping, the name still echoing in my head. Not my name, not Micah's, not Ethan's, a name I didn't recognize, but that felt mine. I didn't tell the others. Somehow, I knew they'd heard it too. We packed up early that morning, heading further into the forest. Ethan said he wanted new angles. Micah didn't argue. I didn't speak at all, but I could feel it. The presence that had called us. It wasn't just watching anymore, it was remembering. And through us, it was starting to speak again. She was me, but wrong. There's something different about silence inside a building that shouldn't be standing anymore. Out in the woods, silence breathes with the wind. With insects and shifting leaves, it has rhythm, even if broken. But inside the old asylum, silence is a weight. It presses against your ears, crawls down your spine, and settles in the hollows of your chest. I didn't want to go in. Micah didn't want to either. Even Ethan, who'd been chasing perfect shots and ambient footage for days, hesitated on the threshold. But we still went inside, stepping over rotted floorboards and shattered glass, ducking beneath beams like bent limbs. The air was thick with mildew and dust, but something else too. A tension, like the walls were holding their breath. The building wasn't on any of our maps. It had shown up in one of Ethan's drone scans the night before, tucked into a forgotten corner of the woods where nothing was supposed to be. He'd gotten excited, muttering something about untouched architecture and lost state records. I just felt my stomach twist. I don't like places with forgotten names. They remember things people have tried to bury. But I followed anyway, camera in hand, flashlight clipped to my vest. The light didn't do much. The deeper we went, the more it bounced off the wrong angles, catching empty gurneys and metal fixtures that looked like they'd never been used, or never stopped being used. We split up. Of course we did, because we were curious, because we hadn't learned, because sometimes the worst thing curiosity gives you isn't death, it's a reflection. I found the mirror in what might have once been a patient common room. The walls were cracked, paint peeling like old bark, and the windows had been long since covered with plywood. My flashlight beam swung across broken chairs, crumbled tiles, and a heap of bird bones in one corner, but it stopped at the far wall. There, still hanging somehow, was a mirror. Perfect, untouched. Its frame was silver, dulled but intact, and the glass didn't have a single fracture. I approached slowly, not because I was curious, but because something inside me recognized it before I even saw my own face. At first, it showed what I expected. Me. Jacket zipped to my neck, camera strap slung across my chest, flashlight in hand. My face looked paler than usual, and my eyes were ringed with the kind of exhaustion that doesn't sleep off. But then I noticed something. My reflection didn't move when I tilted my head. It blinked a second too late. Its mouth was open when mine wasn't. I leaned forward. It did not. It stood still. Its eyes met mine and did not follow when I shifted to the right. And then it tilted its head, slowly, the opposite direction of mine. I took a step back. The reflection didn't. It stayed, watching, not mirroring, just watching. Then, slowly, it smiled. Not wide, just enough. Crooked. Wrong. I turned and walked out of that room without taking another breath. I didn't tell Micah or Ethan what I saw, not because I thought they wouldn't believe me, but because I wasn't sure what I'd seen belonged to the world they still lived in. We regrouped an hour later near the rear stairwell, all of us more pale than when we'd entered. Ethan had found a hallway lined with medical records, all the folders blank, except for one that had his name printed across the top in handwriting that matched nothing else. Micah had found a mural, old and flaking, painted across the ceiling of a supply closet. It showed 3 figures standing in a fog. Their faces turned towards something we couldn't see. One of them had Micah's scar. None of us brought it up at first. We didn't need to. We didn't talk about any of it right away. We just wanted to get out. The air had turned heavier, the silence inside the asylum more personal, like it knew who we were now. I kept glancing over my shoulder as we descended the stairs, not because I heard anything behind me, but because I didn't. That absence rang louder than any footstep. It wasn't until we were back at camp, fire lit, and dusk folding the woods in around us, that I finally said, I saw myself. Micah looked up. In the mirror, I nodded. But it wasn't me. No one laughed. No one doubted. Instead, Ethan said, "Did she smile?" The fire cracked between us. I stared at him. "How did you—" "She was in one of my shots, just for a second. At the edge of the frame. I thought it was you." Micah didn't speak, but I saw the color drain from his face. Whatever I saw inside that building hadn't stayed there. It had come out with us. That night, I zipped my tent up to the top, locked every zipper, tied the inside flaps shut like it could keep something intangible from getting in. Juno lay curled at my feet, eyes open, ears twitching at sounds I couldn't hear. I didn't speak. I didn't journal. I didn't even close my eyes. I waited. It started sometime past midnight. I heard footsteps outside, soft, deliberate. Not crunching leaves, but brushing them aside, like someone walking barefoot. Then the zipper moved, just a tremble. Not pulling, not testing, just twitching like it knew I was awake. I didn't breathe. Then I heard my own voice right outside the tent. "Micah?" A pause. Then again, "Micah, are you awake?" It was me, the voice, the inflection, but I was inside and I hadn't spoken. I reached for the walkie and pressed the button. "Micah," I whispered, "I think she's here." No reply, only static. I looked down. Juno was trembling. When the footsteps left, I waited 30 minutes before I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The woods were still. Ethan's tent was zipped. Micah's was empty. I found him 20 feet into the trees, standing with his back to me, unmoving. I called his name. No answer. When I got closer, he turned. But it wasn't Micah's expression I saw. It was mine, and she smiled at me. She didn't say anything. She just tilted her head to the side, but that same wrong smile curling at the corner of her mouth like it had been stitched there. And then she was gone. Not vanished, just stepped back. Melted into the dark between the trees like mist catching wind. I reached for Micah, and when my hand touched his shoulder, he flinched so hard he nearly dropped to his knees. His eyes were wide, unfocused, like he'd seen something impossible and tried to forget it before it finished happening. We didn't go back to sleep. Ethan joined us by the fire without needing to be called. None of us spoke for a long time. There was no wind, no birds, no sound except the slow collapse of embers. At some point, Ethan said, "She wasn't always like that." I looked at him, and he nodded slowly, eyes still on the fire. "Whoever she is, she used to be someone. Maybe someone like you, or maybe you're just the mask she wants to wear now." Micah didn't speak until dawn. We need to leave this forest. But we didn't, not yet. Something had shifted that night, not just in the woods, but in us. I could feel her watching every time I looked into a shadow. I stopped using mirrors. Ethan disabled the reflection on his camera lens. Micah started keeping something in his pocket, something small and carved and older than any of us wanted to ask about. She never spoke again. She didn't need to. She was already inside. What took Micah? Micah was always the quiet one, not in a way that made him distant, but in a way that made you feel like he was listening to something deeper than what the rest of us could hear. When he walked through the woods, he didn't disturb the leaves. When he stood still, the forest stood with him. I used to think it was just how he was built, raised near the edge of pine and wetland, half feral and unbothered by silence. But now I wonder if something had been speaking to him long before any of this began. He disappeared on the 4th morning. No warning, no sign of struggle, no note. His boots were gone, but not his bag. His coat was still hanging from the branch where he always left it overnight. Harper found the walkie in the mud outside his tent, still functional, but covered in a thin smear of black moss we hadn't seen anywhere else. Juno had been pacing since before dawn. Now she howled, once, low and sharp, then lay down facing the woods and didn't move again for hours. We waited at first, thinking he might have wandered off to clear his head, that he'd come back through the fog with some story about needing space or chasing a lead. But noon came and went, then sunset. The fire crackled on untouched. Harper refused to speak. I kept checking the edge of camp over and over again, waiting for him to step through the trees. I even turned the camera toward the woods at one point and whispered, "Micah, if you're there, say something." He didn't, but the trees did. They whispered back. It started as a rustle, soft enough to mistake for wind, but the air was still. Then came the clicking. Not insects, not branches. A slow, deliberate pattern, like bones tapping against wood. Harper grabbed her recorder without a word and turned it on. I watched her face go slack as the sound grew louder, closer. Then we both heard it. His name, not spoken, not shouted, but breathed. "Micah." Drawn out, strained, like something remembering how to shape a human word. I turned off the camera and stood. "We're going after him," I said, though I didn't remember making the decision. I just knew I couldn't sit there waiting anymore. Harper didn't argue. She handed me an extra battery pack, slung her backpack over her shoulder, and nodded. Juno came without command, her body low, ears back, already sensing what we couldn't explain. The air past the tree line was thick and damp, and as we stepped into the underbrush, everything behind us went quiet, even the fire. We followed no trail. We just followed the sound, faint, intermittent, always just ahead. The forest shifted as we walked. Trees grew denser where they shouldn't. Land dipped where the map said it rose. I tried to mark our path but gave up after the third time we passed the same tree, scarred with a vertical slash. Not carved. Grown that way. We were somewhere else now. Somewhere the forest made for itself. And somewhere in that place, Micah was waiting. Or hiding. Or already gone. We found the first sign of him near a flooded hollow, where the trees grew with their roots exposed like fingers clawing for air. It was his compass. Micah's old, dented brass compass, the one he kept clipped to his belt even when he wasn't using it. Harper picked it up gently, wiped off the mud, and opened it. The needle spun twice before settling not on north, but toward the center of the water. I stepped to the edge and looked in. The surface was calm, a mirror of tangled branches above, but there was something else beneath, just at the limit of sight. A shape, a color that didn't belong. We didn't speak, we didn't scream, we just stood there, frozen, not from fear, but recognition. The hand wasn't reaching, it was resting, waiting. I leaned forward, and the image shifted. Not just the hand now, but a shoulder, a jawline, a shape curled beneath the black water. It looked like Micah, but something was wrong. His skin wasn't right. His mouth hung open wider than it should, and his eyes were already looking up at me. Then the surface rippled, not from movement, but from sound, deep and low, like something exhaling just beneath the mud. Harper grabbed my arm and pulled me back. Juno growled once, then whimpered and backed away on her own. "We're not pulling him out," Harper said quietly. "We're not leaving him," I replied. She didn't answer, but when I looked at her face, I knew she'd seen it too. Whatever was in that water wasn't just waiting, it had already taken him. We circled the hollow once, looking for another sign, footprints, torn fabric, anything that could separate the man we knew from the thing in the water. But the ground was untouched, unnaturally clean. No insects, no moss. Even the fog that usually clung to the woods kept its distance. The silence wasn't passive anymore, it was holding its breath. Harper finally spoke. "If we stay, something else will find us." I wanted to argue, but she was right. Every instinct I had screamed that this wasn't a place made for us. It was a mouth that had already swallowed once. I took one last photo, just one, of the water before we turned back. Not to capture proof, not for the record, just in case we needed to remember where to return. The walk back took longer. The forest didn't want to let us go. Trees closed in and time stretched like molasses in winter. At one point, I checked the camera to distract myself. The photo I'd taken was gone. In its place was a different image. Same angle, same trees, but the water was gone. In its place was dry earth, and on it, Micah stood, smiling, but his eyes were wrong. All pupil, no white, and his mouth was still moving, like he was whispering something, just for me. I deleted it, or I thought I did. It came back an hour later. This time he was closer. We reached camp just after dark. The fire was out. Juno wouldn't go near the tents. She sat with her back to the woods, eyes fixed on something we couldn't see, growling low in her throat like the sound was being pulled from somewhere deeper than instinct. Harper sat beside her, but she didn't unpack, didn't touch her gear. I could tell she was still seeing what I saw. We didn't talk about it. There was nothing to say. That night, I dreamt I was holding the camera again, except the woods were gone. I was standing in a hallway, concrete, wet, flickering overhead light, and Micah was there. Not the one we'd known, but the version from the photo. Pale, grinning, standing perfectly still as I filmed him. His lips moved, and the sound came out of the camera, not his mouth. "Keep watching," it said. "You already brought me back." I woke up with the camera still in my hands. It was on, recording. The lens pointed at my tent flap. I didn't check the footage, I couldn't, but I haven't turned the camera off since. Not because I want to see him again, because I think if I stop watching, something else will. And this time, yes, it won't just take Micah, it'll wear him better, because it already knows how he walked, how he spoke, and now, thanks to me, it knows how I see, the thing with my face. They stopped looking at me the same way after Micah vanished. Ethan tried to hide it, behind long silences and half answers, behind the lens of his camera. But I saw it. The hesitation, the flinch when I walked too close. The way he held eye contact just a second longer than necessary, like he was waiting for something to shift in my face. At first, I thought it was grief. Then I thought maybe he blamed me, but on the fifth morning, when I caught my reflection in the broken screen of the field monitor, I knew it wasn't either of those things. It looked like me. But there was a flicker, a pause, the tiniest lag between my movement and the reflections. My hand rose to touch the edge of my jaw, and the girl on the screen did too, but slower, like she wasn't copying me, like she was catching up. I didn't scream, I didn't panic. I just turned the screen away and told myself it was a delay in the circuitry, a trick of the angle. But I didn't believe that. Ethan asked me later, "Do you remember last night?" I said yes. I remembered sitting by the fire. I remembered Juno barking once into the trees. I remembered Ethan turning off the recorder and crawling into his tent. But he shook his head. "No. After that, you were outside my tent for a while, just standing there." I told him it wasn't me. He didn't argue. He just asked, "Then who was it?" And I didn't have an answer. It started with the notebook. Mine. Same pages, same handwriting, same crease on the cover where I'd bent it backward too far the first night. But the last few entries weren't mine. The dates were correct. The language sounded like me, but I hadn't written them. They mentioned things I hadn't seen, hadn't done. The water tasted like it used to. I touched the tree again today. It felt warmer this time. He's getting closer when I sleep. I read those words 3 times before I closed the book and stuffed it deep in the bottom of my pack. The next morning, my boots were muddy, but not from anywhere near our camp. The mud was darker, thicker, rich black soil like the kind we found near the coal pits west of the ridge. I hadn't been there. Ethan and I had agreed to stay away after Micah disappeared. But when I confronted him, he just looked at me and said, "You were gone for an hour last night. I thought you needed space." I told him I never left my tent, but Juno wouldn't come near me that day. Not once. That afternoon, I checked my camera. Not Ethan's, mine. I hadn't touched it in over a day, but there was new footage, blurry, unfocused, shot from the edge of the trees, pointed at our campfire. 37 minutes of nothing. Then, me, walking into frame, staring at the fire, not blinking, just watching. At the end of the video, I turned and looked straight into the lens. I smiled, and I never remember doing any of it. That night, I didn't sleep. I set up my camera on a tripod across from my tent, lens aimed at the flap, record light off. I put a fresh battery in, double-checked the SD card, then zipped myself in and waited. No dreams, no noise, just the ache of staying awake while the dark presses against the thin walls of your shelter like wet cloth. At some point, I must have blinked too long. The next thing I knew, it was dawn. I grabbed the camera with hands that shook harder than I wanted to admit and rewound the footage. Nothing. For hours. The trees didn't move. The fire didn't flicker. But then, at 3:11 a.m., the tent flap rustled, and I stepped out. But I hadn't moved. The version of me on the screen walked straight toward the camera, stopped 3 feet in front of it, and just stared. She didn't blink, didn't tilt her head. Just watched, long and steady, like she was waiting for something. After 6 minutes, she leaned forward until her face filled the frame. Her lips moved. One word, no sound. Then she turned and walked back into the tent. The real tent, where I'd been the whole time. I closed the file and deleted it. This time I was sure. But later that morning, when Ethan showed me his own footage from the same window of time, she was there again. Only this time, I wasn't in the tent at all. I stopped trying to explain things after that. To Ethan, to myself. I stopped journaling. I stopped asking Juno to come near. I stopped checking my reflection. Whatever it was, this version of me, this thing with my face, it wasn't hiding anymore. It wanted to be seen. And worse, it wanted to convince the others that it had always been me. On the 7th day, I followed it. I waited until just before dawn, when the woods were that kind of gray that doesn't belong to night or morning. I left my tent unzipped, camera on, walkie on, and I walked. I didn't know where to go, but my body did. My feet found a rhythm I didn't set. My hands brushed trees I didn't remember passing, and the deeper I went, the more the woods seemed to shift. The trees grew thinner, the air warmer, the light flatter. Then I saw her, standing at the edge of a dried creek bed. She didn't run, didn't speak, just tilted her head like she'd been expecting me. She looked exactly like me, but cleaner, calmer, like someone who hadn't spent a week unraveling. I stepped closer. She smiled, and then she opened her mouth. But the sound that came out wasn't mine. It was Ethan's voice, saying my name. I don't remember what happened next. Not exactly. There are flashes, leaves brushing my arms, the smell of burnt sap, the sensation of running, though I don't remember my legs moving. I woke up in my tent with dirt under my nails and a bruise on my collarbone shaped like a thumbprint. Ethan said I'd been gone for almost 3 hours, and he said I didn't answer the walkie, and he said when I came back I didn't say a word, just sat by the fire and stared into it until it burned down to coals. I told him I didn't remember any of that, and he said, "I don't think it was you who came back." That night, I stood in front of the mirror we kept clipped to the outside of the gear tent, just stared. My face looked normal, familiar, mine. But the longer I stared, the more it looked posed, like a photograph of me, not a reflection, like someone trying to be me from the inside out. I smiled. It smiled, and for the first time it felt like we smiled for different reasons. I turned away, walked into the trees, and didn't tell Ethan where I was going. If he asks later, I'll say I needed space, and if I come back quiet, if I don't remember things quite right, if Juno won't sit beside me and the fire burns colder than it used to, then maybe I didn't come back at all. Maybe she did. Where the fire goes when it dies, dies. I used to believe that everything could be documented, that if you just hit record at the right time, with the right angle, and held your breath long enough, you could capture the truth. But the longer we stayed in that forest, the more I understood. Some things don't want to be recorded. Some things know when they're being watched. And worse, some things know how to watch back. It started with the fire. It wouldn't light. That morning, after Harper walked into the trees and didn't come back, I tried to build a fire like we always did. Same pit, same lighter, same kindling, but nothing caught, not even a spark. I tried matches, flint, even fuel from the stovepack. The wood hissed but never smoked. It was like the air itself had gone still, like the forest had closed its lungs. Juno sat a few feet away, her ears pinned back, tail curled under her like she didn't trust the ground anymore. I whispered Harper's name once, then again, no answer. I checked the camera, still on, still watching. That's when I realized I hadn't spoken aloud in over 2 hours. I wasn't sure if I still sounded like myself. I played a clip to check, just my boots, wind, trees, then a voice behind the lens. My voice, saying a name I didn't remember knowing, saying it like a prayer. The name stuck with me. I couldn't shake it. I didn't recognize the syllables, didn't know if it belonged to a person or a place or something in between, but it kept circling in my head like it had weight, like it had teeth. I played the clip again. My voice was steady, reverent, and I said it like I meant it. I packed light, just the camera, a flashlight, and Harper's recorder. I didn't bring food. I didn't think I'd need it. The trees parted more easily than they ever had. The trail I followed wasn't one we'd ever marked, but my feet knew where to go. Juno didn't follow. She sat at the edge of camp, unmoving, watching me with wide, unblinking eyes. I walked until the air changed. You know that feeling when you enter a church or a cave or a room where something terrible once happened? That drop in pressure, that awareness of breath. That's what it felt like. The forest didn't end. It just forgot to keep going. Trees thinned until they stood like monuments. The ground beneath me shifted from dirt to ash. And then I found it. A clearing. Circular. Perfect. Like something had burned its way into the earth and left behind the memory of fire. In the center stood a single stone marker. No name, no dates, just a handprint pressed deep into its surface as if someone had been trying to crawl their way out. My hand fit inside it. Exactly. I didn't plan to say the name out loud. I didn't even mean to. But once my hand was in the stone, my mouth moved on its own. The name came out slow, deliberate, syllable by syllable, like a spell I hadn't studied, but somehow still remembered. The clearing didn't echo. It absorbed the sound, swallowed it whole like the trees were listening too closely. For a second, nothing happened. Then the temperature dropped. Dropped. My breath crystallized mid-air. The ash on the ground hardened beneath my boots. The trees bowed inward like something heavy had stepped between them. And behind me, I heard fire. Not flames crackling, but breathing, like fire that had lungs. I turned, slow, afraid that whatever I saw would know I'd seen it. But there was nothing, just the forest again, dense and silent. Except now the camera was shaking, not in my hands, on its own. A subtle tremor, like something beneath the soil, was pressing upward. I hit record anyway, because what else could I do? The screen flickered once, then a shape formed in the distance. At first, it looked like a shadow, then a man on fire. Not burning, made of fire. His body didn't flicker. It moved like oil, slow and deliberate. And his face, it was mine. He smiled and whispered the name back to me. I didn't run. I should have. Every instinct screamed at me to move, to turn, to leave whatever I'd just seen in the ashes and forget I'd ever found this place. But I stayed. Not out of bravery, not out of madness, but because I couldn't tell if I was watching something else or watching myself from the outside in. The fireman didn't speak again. He raised one arm, my arm, and pointed at the stone. I looked down. My hand was still in the print, and it had started to burn. No flame, no smoke, just heat, blooming upward from my skin like something was waking beneath it. I tried to pull back. I couldn't. My fingers had fused with the stone. Not physically, something deeper, like memory or name. I don't know how long I stood there. Time bent around that clearing like heat over pavement. The fireman didn't move, just waited. I realized then that he wasn't calling me into the flame. He was offering to trade places. And part of me, maybe the part that had said the name, was ready. But before I answered, the camera dropped. Not by my hand, it fell on its own. And when I looked into the lens, the image staring back wasn't mine anymore. It was Harper, but not as I remembered her. This one was still burning. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her mouth moved, but the words came from inside my skull. Not thoughts, not hallucinations, just memory, played in a voice that didn't belong to me anymore. She said, "You wanted to understand. Now you do." I reached for the camera, but my hands wouldn't move. Not because I was frozen, but because they were already recording something else. She stepped closer. Her eyes weren't eyes. They were coals. Black at the edges, red at the center, pulsing with something that looked like grief and felt like recognition. She crouched beside me, touched the stone with one hand, and pressed the other against my chest. I didn't feel heat. I felt hollow. I don't remember falling, but I know I landed. The ground caught me like it had been expecting me for years. When I woke up, the clearing was empty. No stone, no ash, no fireman, just trees, dense and green. The air smelled like morning. The fire at camp was burning again. I walked back like nothing happened. Juno barked once, then licked my hand. Ethan's camera still works. It films everything I do, and at night, when I check the footage, I watch myself sleeping. And sometimes, just sometimes, I blink at the wrong time, and I smile before I wake up, We came into the forest looking for stories, ghosts, legends, footage we could cut into something atmospheric and mysterious for the people who liked that kind of thing. We thought we were prepared. We had gear, supplies, maps, experience. But what we didn't have, what we could never have packed, was the wisdom to understand that some places aren't meant to be explained. Some stories don't want to be told, they want to be felt, they want to be lived, and sometimes they want to live you. The lantern line taught us that history echoes, that tragedy leaves residue, and that even when something is buried, it doesn't stay silent. If you shine a light long enough, it starts to shine back. The whispers in the trees weren't just stories, they were memories, waiting for someone foolish enough to listen. And we listened. She Was Me, But Wrong reminded us how fragile identity really is. That the self isn't a fixed point, it's a mirror, and sometimes something else is staring back from inside it. When Micah disappeared, we learned the most painful lesson of all. Some people go into the woods and don't come back the same, or don't come back at all. What took Micah wasn't just a question, it was a warning. Not everything missing wants to be found, and what finds you might not let you leave. The thing with my face taught us that paranoia isn't always wrong, that sometimes the fear of being replaced isn't delusion, it's prophecy. And then there was the fire, the thing that wouldn't burn, and the version of me that did. That final story, where the fire goes when it dies, taught me that understanding doesn't always bring peace, that knowing the name of something gives it a way in, and sometimes the worst thing you can do is press record and hit play. The road out won't feel right for a while. You'll question your memories, second guess every moment, wonder if the people beside you are still the same ones you started with. That's normal. Some forests don't just twist trees, they twist time, identity, intent. What matters is what you carry out. Not the footage, not the maps, but the feeling. The pause before speaking. The glance at your reflection that lingers too long. We went looking for fear and found ourselves instead. Or maybe we lost ourselves a little and something else filled in the gaps. But if you're lucky, if you're careful, you'll remember just enough to stay away next time. Or at least to listen more closely before stepping off the path. These weren't just horror stories, they were warnings. Not just about what's in the woods, but what's inside us when we stop paying attention. When we treat mystery like entertainment. When we forget that belief isn't weakness, it's a shield. And disbelief, that's just an invitation. So take this story with you, hold it quietly, share it with someone who knows how to listen. And if you wake up one morning and the fire won't light, ask yourself one question. Are you the one who came back, or the one who stayed behind?